They call him a legendary critic of religion, but the real tragedy is that he spends his entire argument attacking a God he has never truly defined, a faith he has never truly studied, and a theology he constantly reduces to children's toys, because that is the only version he can defeat. The moment he compares faith to toys, he reveals something fundamental. He is not arguing with the God of Abraham, the God of Jesus, or the metaphysical foundations of divine morality. He is arguing with a caricature, a straw man he built himself so he could triumph over it. You cannot destroy what you have refused to understand, and you cannot refute what you distort because it is easier than meeting it at its intellectual height. When he calls belief a toy people cling to because they fear death, he forgets that the same accusation can be turned against his own worldview. Atheism, too, can be a comfort toy for those terrified of accountability, judgment, transcendence, and moral responsibility beyond their own preferences. He claims believers want to impose their toys on him, but ignores centuries of faith communities that fought, sometimes alone, for human rights, abolition of slavery, literacy for the poor, hospitals, science, equality, the abolition of infanticide, protection of widows, and universal charity. The faith he mocks is the same faith that taught the world that every human being, including him, carries infinite dignity. Yet he speaks as if all religion has produced is intimidation and bullying, while completely ignoring the mountains of evidence that secular regimes, when freed from moral anchors, have produced gulags, mass executions, ideological purges, genocide, and totalitarian horrors far beyond anything the Church has ever conceived. Atheism offers no immunity from tyranny. In fact, history shows the opposite. He mocks the idea of sin, redemption, and divine mercy while pretending it is some form of oppression. But the real oppression would be to live in a universe where nothing you do matters, where justice is an illusion, where morality is a temporary social contract, where the murderer and his victim share the same fate, and where every act of evil simply dissolves into dust with no cosmic accountability. If God did not exist, then Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, and every tyrant who tortured and annihilated millions ultimately got away with everything. The critic never explains why that worldview would be more moral or liberating. He simply avoids the question because atheism cannot answer it without collapsing into nihilism. He says, "Why do you want someone to own you?" As if divine sovereignty were a form of slavery. But he ignores that every human being is already owned by time, by death, by entropy, by biology, by suffering, by desire, by society, by governments, by their own limitations. The question is not whether you are owned. The question is by whom? By blind matter that does not know you exist, or by a creator who endowed you with consciousness, freedom, moral law, and dignity. To reject a loving creator is not liberation. It is simply choosing a colder master. He describes salvation as bullying. Accept this gift or be punished. But this interpretation ignores the core of Christian and Islamic theology. God does not punish people arbitrarily for rejecting a gift, but allows them to experience the natural consequence of rejecting truth, love, and the very moral fabric of the universe. If you jump out of a plane without a parachute, gravity is not bullying you. It is simply what reality does when you deny its laws. Hell is not a divine tantrum. It is the final separation chosen freely by a soul that refuses God's light. Freedom includes the freedom to walk away. He sneers at the idea that someone died for human sins, calling it a human sacrifice you never asked for. But he forgets that love is not measured by who requests it. Love is measured by who gives it. You never asked your mother to risk her life giving birth to you, yet she did. You never asked firefighters to run into burning buildings to rescue strangers, yet they do. The greatest acts of love in the world are not contractual negotiations. They are free gifts. The idea that God entered human history, suffered, and absorbed the consequences of human evil is not totalitarianism. It is the opposite, a God who refuses to crush humanity and instead chooses to suffer for it. He then turns to miracles with the classic David Hume line, "What is more likely that you are mistaken or that the laws of nature have been suspended?" But this assumes what it tries to prove, that nature is a closed system and God does not exist. If God exists, miracles are not violations of nature, they are interventions by the author of nature. If a programmer alters the code of his own software, that is not a violation, it is authority. His argument collapses the moment you stop assuming atheism from the beginning. He attacks the virgin birth as if disproving it would dismantle Christianity, forgetting that the message of Christ does not rest solely on biology. Even if Mary had been proven a virgin, it would not logically prove anything about divine morality. But Christianity does not make such a simplistic argument. The context matters. Prophecy, lineage, historical coherence, resurrection claims, transformative encounters, the birth of a global movement that defied Rome, the radical nonviolent ethos, the fulfillment of messianic patterns. But to acknowledge that requires reading more than 3 verses from the Bible. He laughs at resurrection narratives and says resurrections were banal in ancient times, but offers zero historical verification of this claim. No serious historian teaches that mass resurrections were casually accepted on the streets of Jerusalem. He is simply inventing mythology while accusing others of believing in mythology. He demands evidence, but offers none. His standard is selective. Everything supernatural in Scripture must be dismissed, but every rumor that undermines Scripture must be accepted. He ends with the Pascal's wager attack, calling it vulgar, but again refuses to engage with its philosophical depth. Pascal never argued that belief was a gamble. He argued that every human lives by a gamble. Atheism is a gamble. Agnosticism is a gamble. Secular humanism is a gamble. Everyone wagers with their life, time, morality, and destiny. The only difference is that the believer acknowledges it. He calls God immoral because God judges humanity, but does not explain why a universe without judgment would be moral. He says religion is irrational but never proves why consciousness, love, logic, morality, and human dignity make sense under atheism. He rages against a tyrant in the sky, but the tyrant he imagines does not exist in Christianity, Islam, or Judaism. He rejects an idol of his own making, not the God believers worship. The truth is simple. The existence of God is not disproven by anger, rhetoric, or theatrical outrage. Consciousness, order, mathematical harmony, moral intuition, fine-tuning, the existence of objective evil, the human longing for transcendence, the historical figure of Jesus, the explosion of the church under persecution, and the testimony of billions of souls across millennia point to something far deeper and far truer than his arguments allow. He wants the world to believe that rejecting God makes us free. But in reality, rejecting God only makes us orphans, intelligent creatures wandering in a universe without meaning, purpose, accountability, or hope. That is not freedom, that is cosmic homelessness. The truth that he mocks is the very truth that has carried humanity for thousands of years. God exists, moral law is real, the soul is real, and we are not cosmic accidents stumbling through emptiness. The legendary critic is not wrong because he lacks intelligence. He is wrong because he begins with the wrong premise, fights the wrong enemy, and refuses to see that what he calls toys are the very truths that built civilizations, healed nations, comforted the dying, liberated the oppressed, and gave humanity the courage to believe that life has meaning beyond the grave. The critic can shout, insult, and gesture, but the truth remains standing after every attack.